Hi, I'm David Anderson, founder of Kanban University, and today I'm here with my daughter, Natalie Anderson.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about The Wolf of Wall Street, a movie that's part of our leadership development program.
The Wolf of Wall Street follows the rise and fall of successful stockbroker and Stratton Oakmount founder Jordan Belfort, who started his career with humble beginnings during the 1980s stock market crash. As his company grew, Belfort plunged further into unethical business practices and involved his office in insider trading. This led to his eventual demise and 3-year imprisonment.
What leadership lessons can this movie teach us?
The reason I chose The Wolf of Wall Street was I wanted a movie that illustrates a leader who has a lot of confidence, a lot of charisma, and attracts followers, but isn't necessarily the most ethical or moral person. And I want our students to recognize that leadership isn't always about doing good stuff, that someone can be an effective leader, people will follow them even if what they're doing isn't really contributing to the greater good.
What leadership maturity level is demonstrated by Stratton Oakmount?
So that's a good question, and again, part of why I chose this movie is it demonstrates an organization that's collectively very selfish. It's just about making money and making them rich. And in Jordan Belfort, we have a leader who's very selfish, that it's about making him rich, and if some of his people also get rich, that's great, but they really don't care about their clients. They're not acting in the client's best interest, they're acting in their own self-interest. And in that sense, it's a low maturity business. We're talking about maturity level 1 or 2.
What about Belfort's character makes him an effective leader?
I think the basic things are that he's confident and he's charismatic. His confidence means that he can lead by example. So there's a scene in the movie where he's down on his luck. He's lost his job after the Black Monday crisis in 1987, and he hears about an office that's selling penny stocks out in the suburbs, and he drives out there and goes in to visit their office, and they explain what they're doing, and he asks them whether it's legal or not, and they basically say, well, yes, it's more or less. So he asks about an example of a stock. They explain about some company that's making radar technology in some little back garden shed or something, and he goes and picks up the phone and he calls a client who had mailed in some, from a magazine. Maybe they've cut out the little form and mailed it in and said, hey, I'm kind of interested in what you're offering. So he calls them up and he pitches them the stock, and he sells this person, I think it's $4,000 worth of shares in this little tiny company making the radars. And while he's doing it, all the other guys in the office, they just stop and listen, watch him, and they're like, wow, that was amazing. So he's very inspiring to these other people. So he's leading by example, and that's one of the ways that he's a good leader, that he can lead by example, he can inspire people. Now, it doesn't mean that he's always a good example, right? In other ways, he's leading by example, setting bad examples, right? Because the business grows into something that's very debauched, right? They do a lot of drugs, they have a lot of prostitutes, lap dancers or whatever. They there are scenes where there's like a college band that's been paid to, play music in their underwear. And there's a lot of very undignified behaviour. One of the things that he seems to be good at is showing that if you throw enough money at someone, they can throw out their dignity, right? That he demonstrates this sort of very negative side of humans, that they'll trade their dignity. The girl who gets her hair cut, the head shaved so she can have $10,000, and she promised to spend it on breast implants. This is totally not dignified at all, right? So he's setting a bad example, but there will be probably guys more than women in the office who think, wow, that's really cool, right? And they follow him, they admire him. So he leads by example, he inspires people, but only at some level that we might generally describe as quite kind of adolescent, right? He's like a teenage boy who never grew up.
What do you think makes Jordan Belfort inspiring?
I think it's very basic stuff. He's a good-looking, charming guy. He's very likable, and he puts energy into being nice to people, liking them. And perhaps one of the great leadership lessons from this movie is to teach that leadership isn't always about likability, but at a low maturity level, it's a very important driver. If someone's a likeable person, people will follow them, especially if they're looking for very shallow rewards. That someone with low self-esteem can be easily manipulated by someone who just likes them. They're like, oh, this person likes me, they value me. So there's that, and then of course he's actually quite successful at what he does. So he makes money, and then he has the things that money buys: fancy cars, beautiful girlfriends, lovely house. Then he gets a big boat, and people look at that and they're impressed. We see that with his first junior guy, Jonah Hill's character, Donnie. And Donnie knows that Jordan Belfort lives in the same building as him. He meets him in like a burger bar or a diner, and he says, you live in my building. And he looks outside at his Jaguar XK, his like classic 1960s sports car. It's probably worth a fortune. And he says, that's your car. And how can you have a car like this but you live in my building? And what do you do for a living? And then he asks him, how much money did you make last month? And he says, well, about 70,000. He's like, no, you're bullshitting me. Prove it. He shows him the paycheck for 72,000, and Donnie quits his job immediately and signs up to follow him. So his success, but it's a success that motivates people only in a very selfish kind of way. It's about making money and having stuff. Yeah.
Does an effective leader have to be likable or charismatic?
This is an interesting question. And I think other movies in this series are going to show very effective leaders who recognise that leadership isn't about being liked, it's not about popularity. Really effective high maturity leadership is about respect. So because leaders who have to deal with very difficult problems and make very challenging decisions, sometimes decisions where there's no good choices and you have to pick the best of the worst choices, there are always going to be people who don't like your decision. For example, say a president or a prime minister of a country who has to raise taxes or to stop spending government money. In the financial crisis of 2008, 9, 10, governments had to make tough decisions because they didn't have enough money anymore. And that's never going to be popular. Right? So really high maturity leadership isn't about popularity, it's about doing the right thing, driven by some purpose and some duty, and having the stomach to make difficult decisions and recognize that people will respect you for the long-term impact rather than the short-term gratification. Where this movie's much more about short-term gratification. It's lower maturity leadership, and he's effective at that level because he's very likable. Now, Jordan's character doesn't strike me as terribly narcissistic. Yes, he loves his stuff, he loves his fancy cars and his big house and his yacht and his beautiful wife and so on. He loves all of that. But he's not a guy who spends a tremendous amount of time grooming himself in the mirror or worrying about how he's looking. And he doesn't seem terribly narcissistic or manipulative. So in that sense, he's not fond of himself. He's not a narcissistic, manipulative person. He's just really quite a childish, adolescent boy in a man's body. Although I think at the time of this story in his life, he's still in his 20s, right?
Pretty young.
Yeah, he starts the business maybe when he's 24 and he goes to jail when he's 29 or... Right.
I mean, he's still pretty young.
Yeah, he's quite a young guy, basically. He's still young enough to remember what it was like to be a teenager. And he's still very fascinated by all these sort of things that teenage or college-age boys value. Right.
Do you think that there are other effective leaders in this film, and what makes them effective leaders, if so?
This movie's not packed with a lot of characters that demonstrate leadership. We get little cameo roles. We see Matthew McConaughey at the beginning, before the financial crash of 1987, and he's the senior trader of two traders who bring in Jordan as their junior guy. And we see Matthew McConaughey taking quite a paternal view of his new junior guy helper, and giving him career advice and helping him develop and focus on passing his exams so that he becomes a full trader on his own. So there's some leadership there, but it's a very short cameo role at the beginning. The FBI team that take down Belfort, there's probably some leadership there, but there must have been, but we don't see a lot of it in the script. So there aren't so many other amongst Jordan's group of the tight-knit group, the leadership team of Stratton Oakmount. We don't see a tremendous amount of leadership from them, and occasionally when we do, it's not very good leadership. Right? So Donnie, for example, intervenes from time to time and shouts at members of the staff. And then there's the scene where he eats the goldfish, right? And Donnie's not as good of a leader as Jordan Belfort is. That's quite clear. That Jordan Belfort seems to inspire his staff. They seem to like working at this company. He's quite hands-off with them. He gives them general direction, and he also passes down his techniques. He writes scripts for them to help them with selling, and he helps to make them successful in that way. But he seems to be quite hands-off. They seem to have quite a lot of empowerment. They're quite autonomous. Donnie, on the other hand, is very sort of interventionist. He's like a helicopter parent, and he gets angry. He's easily triggered. So, not very effective leadership. Right? So this movie's primarily about Jordan Belfort, Leonardo DiCaprio's character. Yeah.
Does an effective leader have to achieve net positive for the world, do you think?
At a higher maturity level, yes, but what we see here is an effective leader at the scale of he was capable of building a business to a certain scale, maybe a few hundred employees, that made a lot of money. And it was successful for a period of time, but it was fundamentally fragile because they were breaking the law. And the business was never going to survive for a long period of time unless they corrected their behaviour and obeyed the law. If they had done that, they wouldn't have been as profitable. So perhaps the gamble he was taking was, let's break the law and grow very fast for a while until we've reached some sustainable size and sustainable level of capital that we might be able to compete with the other big trading companies, big investment banks. They focus a lot on the IPO, the initial public offering for Steve Madden, the Steve Madden shoes business, and that's because it's the first time they're doing something like that, and it's like moving up to a higher league, and now they compete with the big boys. And maybe if they'd done that and achieved it in a legal way, they could have pivoted to let's play within the rules now, let's run a legal business. But perhaps part of the thrill for Jordan Belfort was that he was breaking the law. Or, to be honest, it feels like he didn't really care. He didn't respect the laws. He only thought about himself and his immediate company and his very selfish concerns. If he's breaking laws, maybe hurting other people, white collar crime, it feels like no one really gets hurt. And he didn't really appreciate that what they were doing was illegal and he would go to jail. It's not until he actually does that he has that humbling that presumably changed him as a person.
Could you elaborate on what you mean when you said a higher maturity level company must achieve net good?
Yeah, so I think that a purpose-driven business is founded on the basis of our company exists to do some good in the world. And there's a quote from a book which Richard Branson often quotes, and I've forgotten the original book. Maybe we'll look it up and give it in the notes with the video. But Branson quotes this frequently, and he said, people believe that companies exist to make profits. They have that backwards, that companies make profits in order to exist. So a high maturity business has some purpose to do some good in the world, but they need to be able to make a profit so that they can fund that project. And it's almost like a side effect that the shareholders, the investors, they get some financial benefit. A lower maturity business exists only to make money, and generally that's not sustainable in the long term. Businesses that have pivoted, and we have some, I don't know, maybe not on my shelf right here, just behind you. Right, so this is one of my favourite books, Obliquity by John Kay. John Kay's an economist and a writer for the Financial Times and the Economist magazine. And this book focuses on companies that lost their vision. So the company that your grandfather worked for, ICI, and the subsidiary, the Nobel's Explosives Company, ICI was one of Britain's two biggest businesses, and their original mission statement was a sort of 1950s version of do cool stuff with chemistry.
Okay.
Right? Which means that they could be in the explosives business because that's chemistry, or at the other end of the scale they could be in the pharmaceutical business, and their pharmaceutical business called Zeneca, which still exists. And they also did paints and all sorts of chemicals, liquid nylon to be spun into nylon fabric and things like this. So that was all very well until 1991, and they changed the mission to simply make like 15% return on investment. And it didn't matter what business they were in anymore as long as they could make money. So businesses that weren't very profitable, they just got rid of them. They invested in a whole bunch of other things, and there was no strategy to it. It was just this random collection of businesses that they believed would make money for the shareholders. Well, within 15 years, the company had disappeared, collapsed, gone, sold off into small bits. Many of the bits, they still exist. But, so a company that was maybe 150, 200 years old, and it was gone in 15 years because they moved away from being a purpose-driven business to being just a money-making business. So there's lower maturity. I'm only focused on the financial benefit for me and us, versus we're here for a reason, and if we want to keep pursuing this reason, we still have to make a profit. And if we're making a profit, well, if you're one of the shareholders, you're getting a little bit of a benefit out of that as a side effect. That's the difference.
What do you hope that your leadership students get out of this film when they watch it?
I think the important thing, and what I see with a lot of our students who come through our classes, they conflate leadership with lots of other concepts that are a little bit orthogonal. So I want them to really understand that leadership is about getting people, a group, to follow you and achieve something with some level of alignment, and that can be orthogonal to whether it's ethical or whether it's moral or whether it's legal, or whether it's actually doing any good in the world. That it could be a net negative, it's making a few people rich, but it's hurting a whole bunch of other people. And that in the local sense, that person's an effective leader. They're not necessarily a good person, but they're an effective leader. And I chose this movie as part of the curriculum because I didn't want to have a movie about Adolf Hitler or General Franco, or pick your random fascist dictator from whichever period in history you want. I didn't want a movie that's full of dead bodies and atrocities happening. We could have gone down that path to illustrate the similar concept, but I thought this was a little more fun, and it's more it's about a business rather than running a nation state or something. So in that sense, maybe it's more relatable that people that come through our training are business people, they're running businesses, they're always facing challenges like, are we obeying the regulations and the constraints that might come with that, and the costs, and with these higher costs, can we be profitable? And occasionally businesses fall off that path. You're maybe not old enough to remember the scandal a few years ago with the Volkswagen Group, where they were cheating with their diesel engines. So the cars all have to pass the emission tests to be legal, and Volkswagen had their software engineers tweak the software so that when the car was doing the test, it didn't pump out so much bad smoke. And they cheated the emission tests. They made their cars look much cleaner than they really were. And in the end, the programmer who did it went to jail for 8 years. But the senior executives who asked them to do it, they've still never been punished. Now, why did they do that? Why did they break the rules? They wanted to sell more cars. They wanted to make more profit. Short-term gratification, so that executives get their bonus, and it makes them rich. But it was the wrong thing to do. So I thought this movie was a more fun way to explore those difficult topics, rather than a movie that's strewn with dead bodies and you know, a lot of human suffering.
If you are interested in learning more about leadership and management, please visit djaa.com to view our classes and pricing.